Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Sarah DiVello. Sarah is a true crime writer and the author of Broadway Butterfly, a thriller named an Entertainment Weekly Best Book of Summer and an AARP Hot Summer Read. She's also the creator and host of Mystery and Thriller Mavens, a popular author series and interactive face group. For her weekly Mystery and Thriller Mavens live events, she has interviewed more than 300 authors, ranging from the best-selling and world-renowned Dean Koontz, Patricia Cornwell, Lee Child, Jeff Deaver, Tamron Hall, Karen Slaughter, Ruth Ware, Lisa Unger, and many more, to the buzziest debuts. While creative and active on her social media platforms, DiVello also serves as the director of social media strategy for the International Thriller Writers Association. Her articles have been published in Marie Claire, Elle, Redbook, Cosmopolitan, and Women's Day, among others. In her spare time, she likes to teach yoga, cook and eat, garden, and go for leisurely walks with her husband and their beloved rescue mutt, Paluda. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I am so excited to be here. And I noticed a name missing from that star-studded list of authors that I've interviewed, which is Danielle Girard.
Well, thank you. That was super fun. I know it's fun to be switching shows, and now it's my turn to get the dirt on you. So, the dirt on the book, shall we say? And there's a lot of good dirt in this book. So before we get too deep into all my questions, can you tell our listeners about Broadway Butterfly?
Yes. So Broadway Butterfly is the true story of a scandalous flapper named Dot King, who's found murdered in her bed in 1923, wearing a scandalous lacy negligee that barely reached her knees. And the investigation reveals a crazy array of characters, real life people that run the gamut from the underbelly of Broadway all the way up to the White House. You cannot make this stuff up, which is why it is a true story. And I am so excited to share it with you today.
Oh, it was so fun to read. And literally, so I want to ask about first, let's talk about research, because clearly, holy cow. There are, as you said, there's a dozen characters in this book that are very, big personalities that have a lot to do with what happened to Dot, or what you think happened to Dot. So how did you go about researching it?
So Danielle, the research for this book took me 9 years, the better part of a decade of my life. Yeah. I can't quite believe it. I naively thought it would take me only 1 year. Hashtag poor jerk. 9 years later, here I am. But it took me to some truly far-flung and fascinating places. So I interviewed subject matter experts that from professors to police detectives, from presidential libraries to hiring a psychic that works with law enforcement on cold cases. There is no avenue that I left unexplored. And, from the bowels of the New York Public Library to the presidential museums to the rare books collections at the University of Pennsylvania, Columbia University, the J.P. Morgan Library Museum in New York. It was some really fascinating places, places where you have to put your stuff in a locker and scrub your hands in so that the oils from your fingers don't get on the antique paper. Yeah. I could never have anticipated any of this.
Right. So the whole idea came to you, and you mentioned it in the acknowledgments, which I love. So tell our listeners, you were in the middle of a different book when this happened. So tell us that story.
Yeah, so I was 50,000 words into a first draft, a crappy first draft of an
That's how they are, right?
That's how they are, of an entirely different book. And I went home for Thanksgiving to be with my family in Philadelphia. And, the day after Thanksgiving, you're sitting around, you're eating your leftover turkey sandwich, unless you're out hitting the Black Friday sales, which my family was not. And we were sitting around and conversation turned to reminiscing. So my aunts and my uncles and my cousins were, family stories start getting told. And my uncle Ed, started reminiscing that back in the 60s, after high school, he and my uncle David, after school let out, used to sneak over to the old castle and they'd sneak cigarettes and drink beers, as you do in the 60s.
Yes, exactly. As young people are known to do, right.
As they are wont to do. And so he was, talking about this and we were all having a good laugh. And then I said, wait a minute. What castle? Because my aunt lives in a very normal suburban development where every single house is a split level ranch, 3 steps up, 3 steps down, circa 1950. And
right.
I'm literally looking around, I'm sorry, what castle? It just was so bizarre.
Right.
And so he said, well, they're in the next, down the road, quarter of a mile or whatever it was. And then, another identical suburban, development, there used to be a grand estate from the 1920s, and the ruins of this estate still are standing today, even though it was demolished in the 1980s. It was razed to the ground. And so as a history lover who minored in European history, and what I love about history is architecture, needless to say, I was intrigued. I had to know more. So all 11 of us pile into cars, we caravan over, and there in between, the Subarus and the tulip beds are the remnants, the ruins of an actual castle. So, 50-foot tall pillars stretching up toward the sky that used to be the entrance, headless statues of Diana and Zeus, the edges of a little pool where a fountain once gurgled, and, a fish statue would spout water. I mean, it just was so crazy. But then there's someone's house and their car and, their kids, tricycle or whatever, and it was so mind-boggling and cognitively dissonant to have somebody's house and then a statue in their backyard next to the bird feeder. I had to know more. So I dove down the research hole, the rabbit hole. I learned everything there was to know about this home, this family. 147 rooms, 70 full-time gardeners just to maintain the grounds, 3 floors above ground, 3 floors below, 24 fireplaces, 27 bathrooms, a movie theater, their own radio station in the house, a gymnasium, a ballroom. I mean, it was so, this level of wealth was unimaginable. And so after, I learned everything. I'm sorry, it was 28 bathrooms, not 27. I don't want to shortchange a bathroom.
We need all the toilets we can get. That's so funny.
So I learned everything there was to learn about this, but I thought, that's fascinating, but I personally am not going to write the history of this great estate as fascinating as it is.
Right.
So I left it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it because my spidey sense said there was a story here. There was something more here to be unearthed and discovered and revealed. So about 2-3 months later, I went back to it and I just kept, Googling and researching and whatever. And then I found, I believe, I have to double check the pub date, but I believe it was a 1953 book. And I can't remember the exact title, but it was something like Scandalous Philadelphia, the 100 most scandalous things to ever rock the Quaker City. Yeah. And there it was one paragraph, one line that said, the great, this great estate found itself, connected to a murder in 1923. And immediately all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up and I said, that's my story. And I just knew it.
That is amazing. I mean, and it is so I'm assuming the Julia is a real person.
Julia Hartman and all of these characters are real people. So Julia Hartman is a pioneering woman of journalism, one of the 6 pioneering women of journalism at the turn of the last century. And she has been almost completely forgotten by history. This is a woman whose work should be taught in classrooms, when we speak of journalism and when we speak of women in journalism and when we speak of crime reporting. This is a person who should be right up there, and she has been completely forgotten. So it was a real pleasure to unearth her story and bring her to the forefront. And I hope that part of what happens when this book comes out is that people will become aware of the extraordinary person that she was.
Yeah. And she was involved in this case. I guess I wonder, what, because of course in true crime, you have to take license, right? I mean, you're not there's not transcripts of what these people said or what they thought or any of that. There's no journal to go by that you're just like, reciting. So how, how do you do that? Like, of course, everything I write is 100% made up from my brain. So I don't have to, thank God, I don't have to like follow any real stuff that I would mess up. But I'm curious to know how you, so, how did you sort of figure out that Julia, for instance, was going to be the main point of view, which was so fascinating. As you said, she's an incredible woman and a wonderful character, and she puts herself in some, sketchy positions to get some answers. So tell us about sort of, how do you do that?
So I got as much as I possibly could from court transcripts, from memoirs by people who were involved in the case, and from newspaper articles, because of course she was a newspaper reporter, from her newspaper articles that she personally typed, out on out on her little typewriter. And also because this was national news because of who was involved in the scandalous, salacious nature of the subject matter. It quickly caught fire and became national news. So I also, found all of those newspaper articles. So I amassed over 1,700 pieces of research, some virtually and some in person. So when I started researching this case in 2014, the New York Daily News, which was Julia's newspaper, their archives were not digitized. So I had to go to the Milstein microfilm room in the New York Public Library and pull out a drawer full of rolls of microfilm, feed it into the little machine, and scroll through page by page by page,
looking for
articles.
Oh my gosh!
Looking for articles.
No wonder it took forever. I mean, right?
Exactly. No, exactly, because you cannot search. There's no search terms in microfilm. You have to use your good old-fashioned eyes to look for headlines or bylines. And most reporters back then didn't have bylines. I would say 95% of reporters didn't have the honor, the esteem of a byline. You just wrote anonymously and you were grateful to have a job. But 2 weeks before this case, Julia was awarded her own byline, which is a huge honor. Only the best reporters got, and she earned that. She earned that. And so many of her articles are bylined, although some are not. And when, after her life is threatened and she's in real physical danger, she starts to write anonymously because she has to protect herself, just to stay alive.
Right. And so you were able to sort of just like intuit which of the articles would have been hers based on the writing, based on the subject matter, knowing that she was at the center of this case.
So some of them were bylines, so then I have that proof, but then also because I had read all of her articles and then I also transcribed them myself, so I dictated them into a microphone, and so I learned the rhythm of her speech, her sentence structure, how she liked to work, how she liked to write, her word choices. I learned her secrets, or special sauce. We all can sort of tell who has who has written a book. You're like, oh, that feels like a Stephen King. He has a certain rhythm, a certain pattern. You think to yourself, oh, that's not a a more lyrical writer or whatever. So she, I learned her rhythms and her preferences. And so I got to the point where I could actually not even look at the byline and know which ones were hers.
That's cool.
It was really cool. But I was fortunate enough to get some of them that were bylined.
Yeah. So you could kind of check on that. So, so as you were, you had 9, I guess, as you're sort of, collecting this information and doing this research is sort of when the characters come to life for you, right?
Yes.
And when did you sort of the 9 years of research, at what point did you sort of say, okay, I'm going to start sort of piecing this together as a book? Or did you do all the research, first and then, sort of how does that work? Because it seems it's such a, like I said, it's a huge commitment of time.
It's huge commitment. So I researched for about 9 months, just exclusively researching. I didn't even, to my own detriment, didn't take notes, which I bitterly regret, and which I will never not do again. And then I just was like, this is so fascinating. How could I ever forget it? 1,700 pieces of other fascinating, articles later. It's like, oh wait, where did I read that? So live and learn. I researched exclusively, and then about 9 months in, I felt like I had started to get my arms around the case, and so I started to write.
Mhm.
And I had thought I'm not a plotter. Usually, I'm an organic writer, or what they call a pantser. So I thought to myself, because this is a true story, and because I have the actual historical chronology of what actually happened, that should be enough.
Mhm.
Um, Poor naive jerk. It was not. It was not, Danielle. So I had
Yeah,
to. That actually took a lot more time too. So I had to go back and sort of try to organize it better. Then, as I was writing, I kept discovering more need for research. Where, oh wait, what would have happened, here in order to make that happen later? Why would the police have
right,
been looking at this particular person and not this
right,
other person? Why, and so then I would start to research that person, and okay, well, who was involved in that? And then, and then
right.
that would require another week or month of research or whatever. So, and then I started researching and writing in tandem, first to fill in
Right.
those holes and then also to enrich it. Now, as I was discovering these characters, as I was unearthing them, like an archaeologist with a tiny, a tiny
Right.
little brush,
Right.
I found out. So the first person that I discovered was Dot King, the murder victim.
Right. Right.
And then I realized very quickly that the lead reporter who was covering this case was a woman. And so I was like, okay, that is
Yes.
that is
You're like,
fantastic.
yes, I'm doing that. I'm totally doing that. Right.
I am doing that. And then I realized that the source that was most valuable to the police was Dot's closest friend, confidant, and the keeper of all her secrets, the woman who discovers her murder, discovers the
Right.
body, Ella
Right.
Bradford. And I thought,
Right.
well, she's fabulous and fascinating and a fearless pioneer of a woman who,
Right.
left everything and everyone that she knew in her native Jacksonville, Florida, and got on a train by herself at the age of 21 years old, and went 1,000 miles north
Right.
to New York City,
Right.
and made it in search of a better life for herself. And Ella Bradford was Black, and at this
Right.
time Jacksonville was segregated, so Ella Bradford sat in a quote unquote colored waiting room,
Yeah.
segregated from the white people, to get on a quote unquote colored train car,
Yeah.
to again segregated from white people, to go north to New York City, which at the time was not segregated. And what must that have been like for her?
Right.
Um,
And not to mention that even though New York City wasn't segregated, there was still rampant racism. So that's a
yes,
real, I mean, they were, she also felt some danger, some personal danger, and she had a little boy. So there was a lot, the stakes of the story really rose very naturally. And then there's all these really shady characters,
yes,
and then the detective who really wanted to do a good job, which I really appreciated, right? But again, the politics of all of that, and then the timing right before, as it ends, as it happens to hit into the Great Depression, and that's its own sort of, right? I mean, it is, all of that just feeds all of it really, really beautifully. I mean,
exactly, to everything you said so eloquently and so insightfully. I mean, you totally get it, exactly, all
yeah,
of that. And I think Ella Bradford was in a very dangerous position,
yeah,
because as she's already in a vulnerable position, because she is young, she is Black,
yeah,
and she has information that some very powerful people do not want to get out.
right,
But that information is what is going to catch Dot King's killer. And
right,
Ella Bradford was not just, didn't just work for her. She was not just an employee. She was Dot King's closest friend, her, her
right,
her only confidant, and she very much cared about Dot. And she
right,
wants her killer caught and brought to justice. But in order to
right.
do that, she has to reveal the very sensitive information that endangers her own life, and she is a six
Yes.
month old baby. So
Yes.
that is a tough position for her to be in.
Very. And I mean, it's just amazing that the stakes, I mean, that the stakes created by this true situation are so natural and so escalating. I love the way that worked. So this is your debut mystery,
Yes, ma'am.
which is so exciting. Congratulations. Tell us about that journey. I know you've written books before. It sounds like you were 50,000 words into another book. So once you completed this book, was that, tell us, how did you get an agent? How long did that take? Did you do revisions? I think we have a lot of listeners who are aspiring authors, so we want to hear about sort of what the process was for you. I know, it's so exciting.
Yay. And thank you for bringing that up because I think it's so important to talk about because I think so often we aren't transparent enough with that. And it just
Right,
is like, ta-da, I have produced a book. And then it's
right,
like that has just hatched from an egg. And it's like,
right.
no, let's talk a little bit more about what it took to get this egg to hatch. Um,
Yes.
so yes. So okay. So first of all, I self-published my first book, which was a career memoir in 2013. It took me 5 years to write, edit, and publish that. And I chose to self-publish that because for all of the wonderful reasons that there wonderful and legitimate reasons that there are to self-publish, like
Yeah,
creative control,
yeah,
which was very important to me, like speed to market. As you well know, and many of your listeners may know, it usually takes a couple years to get a book to market in terms of it takes a long time to try to get an agent and the odds are stacked against you. That's after you finish the book and it
right.
takes a couple years and the odds are stacked against you. Then you have to go out on submission to the publishers and the odds are stacked against you and it takes a couple of years. Then you finally sell the freaking book and then it's time to get in their queue and then it's another 2 years usually until that book hits the shelves. And
Yes,
so because I had an idea for a book that had never been done before, which was a yoga memoir about finding your path and stepping away from what is familiar, convenient, easy, lucrative, expected into that
right.
which fulfills you, told through the lens of working in the male-dominated world of financial services to teaching yoga, which is very, very female-dominated, but equally cutthroat, surprisingly. That had
Yeah,
never been done before, but I knew it's only a matter of time until someone else had the same idea. So I wanted to get to market fast. And
yeah,
knowing that it had already taken me 5 years to write it, I didn't want to spend another 2 or 3 trying to get an agent, get the press. I'm like, I got to get this thing out on the shelves before someone else thinks of it.
right.
So I had a very strong vision for, I knew the cover I wanted, I knew the content that I wanted. So I self-published that myself. And I had a great experience and I very much considered self-publishing this one as well.
Yeah,
But as I was working on it and thinking, I'll cross that bridge when I get to it, I also, there was also obviously the pandemic. And in the spring of 2020, as all of my events were canceled and all of everyone's events were canceled, I
right.
decided to found an Authors Helping Authors volunteer initiative where I would interview my fellow authors to help them connect with readers and get the word out about their books in the wake of canceled in-person events. So I launched, I started doing my mystery and thriller mavens interviews. Now, as I was doing that, I interviewed an author. I've interviewed, I think I've interviewed about 400 authors 3 years later, but in the course of this series, I interviewed an author and afterward, her agent contacted me and said, hey, you're a great interviewer. Can I pitch you my other authors? And I said, sure. I'm happy to hear your pitches. So we set up a time to talk and she pitched me all her authors. Some I took, some I didn't. And in the course of that conversation, she said, who the heck are you? Are you a journalist? Are you, who are you?
Right, right,
And I
right.
said, because she only knew me through my series. I said, well, I'm first and foremost consider myself a writer. She said, what do you write? I told her, I said, well, I'm working on a book. And I told her, she said, that sounds great. I'd be very interested in hearing more about that or, seeing your pitch when you're ready to go out on submission. I said, great, thanks. I'll let you know. So then she had said, oh, let's have lunch. And thanks for interviewing, the author that I had interviewed. So we went out to lunch and we just really hit it off. You know,
Right.
she's a sassy Greek lady. I'm a sassy Italian lady.
Right.
She sees the value in self-publishing. She has helped some of her other authors self-publish, and I really liked that. I think there's no right way to do things, and I think that so often people in the publishing industry are like, "This is the way, the one and
Right.
only." It's like, no. And
Right.
she was really open. We were like-minded in the fact that we prefer to see it as a broader conversation, and there are value in many different paths. So
Right.
I sort of thought to myself, this lady and I are aligned. Like she gets it. And so she, she texted me the next day and she said, so we left the lunch and she said, maybe I'd be interested in seeing your pages if you were possibly interested in sending
Right.
this to me. And I said, well, you know, and I'm hedging too, like, well, maybe I'd be interested in
Right.
possibly exploring that. You know, we're both, you know, two boxers circling each
Of
other.
course, of course.
Neither of us wanting to commit. And then she texted me the next day. She said, listen, I think we'll be friends. Meanwhile, I'm like, you're still on audition. I'm still haven't like, you know,
Right.
you're still auditioning to be my friend here. But she said, you know, listen, before we take this any further, maybe we don't even want to, you know, I think we'll be friends, but maybe it's not a love match professionally. Let's even see if we're a match. Let me even
Right.
see if I'm interested in your work, and you see if you're interested in my thoughts. Maybe we're not
Yeah.
aligned.
Right.
And I thought that makes sense. And I said, well, I'm not ready to go out on submission because I already had a list of other agents that I was considering querying.
Right.
Um,
Right.
you know, I had been speaking and teaching nationally on using social media for shy authors. I've been doing that for 12 years. And,
Yeah.
you know, at another writers conference, a couple of agents has come up to me and said, hey, you seem, you know, really cool. Here's our cards. Contact us when your book is at, you know, when you're ready to go out on submission. So I was like, you know, I already have some interest, like,
Right.
but then I thought, you know what? Why not? Let's just see how it goes. And so I thought I'll start to test the market. So I sent her my first 4 chapters, and she said, you know, my son's home from, you know, spring break for college. You know, I'll get back to you in a couple weeks. And I said, great,
Yeah.
talk to you then.
Yeah.
And I think it was 8 hours later, she texted me and said, oh my God, I can't stop reading. This is, you know, fantastic. I want to offer you representation. And it was
Yeah.
it was not what I was expecting. This is not how, I don't have to tell you or any of your listeners, this is not how it usually works.
No. No.
So of course I was suspicious. I was like, it's too easy. She, you know, she likes me too much. You know, this is happening too easily. Something must be wrong with it. But then I realized, no, like sometimes it does just happen this way.
It's a connection. She connected to the book, which is awesome.
Exactly. And I wanted to do something, again, I think outside the box. I'm interested in doing things differently. So I wanted to do a genre mashup. I wanted to take what I love about, you know, true crime. I'm a true crime junkie. I listen to the podcasts, I watch the documentaries, you know, then I watch the other documentary. Like I consume, you know, true crime because I am Team Twain. I think Mark Twain got it right that truth is stranger than fiction. And I love that. I like to lean into that. But I think it often is a little bit of a slower read. It's a denser read, and you hear the voice of the narrator, and it's often a journalistic kind of voice.
Right.
So I thought to myself, what if I take the cool factor of truth is stranger than fiction, but I take the readability of fiction, because fiction is a faster read, and I do a genre mashup. I take the best of 2 worlds.
Like creative nonfiction, basically, is what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I said to, you know, so Liza Fleissig, my agent, she said, as soon as I read it, she said, I said to myself, oh my God, this is effing brilliant. Why doesn't everyone do this? But she warned me, she said, not everyone's going to agree with me. She said, we might go out on submission and some people might say to us, what are you guys smoking? Like, we don't do it like this for a reason. We do, there's true crime and there's fiction, and never the two shall, you know, intersect. So, but she said, I'm willing to take a chance on this if you are. And that really resonated because I said, I am willing to take a chance. And I want someone who's willing to take a chance on me and who sees the nucleus and the value of the story that I hope to provide. And that's how I knew she was the one for me.
That's amazing. So she was with you sort of as you were writing the book. I mean, you know, you had, or at least in the sort of later stages of writing the book. And then
I mean, it was done by then. I was just polishing because I'm an OCD, anxiety riddled perfectionist who would honestly still be polishing if Liza hadn't pried it out of my cold dead fingers. Because I could just really like never stop doing that.
Right. Well, it's hard to let go, right? It's hard to let go and be like, it's good enough. And somebody else is going to also edit it. And so did you always know that you were going to write true crime? I mean, when you started to sort of like the book that you were writing, that you were sort of 50,000 words into, was that also true crime?
Danielle, it was women's fiction.
Okay.
It was so far different because I think what really fascinates me is women at work.
Yeah.
And you know, my memoir, my self-published book, Where in the Om Am I, really focuses on women at work, and not just women, people at work, but it's about you know, what is fulfilling to you? What is your life's work? What do you want to invest and spend your time
Right.
doing, so that at the
Right.
end of your life, you can say, this is what I've done. Here's my body of work.
Right.
You know, this is what I have dedicated my life to.
Right.
And that is very fascinating to me, the idea of one's life's work.
Yeah.
And so additionally, I think it's extra complicated for women, because the people who do choose to parent, the burden of parenting almost always falls on the mother, on the female partner. And that often makes women at work's life harder.
Yeah.
And so I was exploring that through the lens of, you know, of two female friends at work, one of whom chooses to be a parent, one of whom chooses not to, and how that impacts their friendship and their lives and their choices and their careers and all this stuff. So I was 50,000 words into that story. I had never thought that I would write a true crime, because frankly, I didn't feel worthy. I loved mysteries. I was a Nancy Drew girl. My grandmother was reading Nancy Drew to us before we could read, and then she was reading P.D. James to us before, frankly, she should be reading P.D. James to kids.
Right.
But we loved it. We didn't care that it was violent, and it has always been my favorite genre. But I didn't think that I could be one of the people who wrote it. I didn't feel worthy.
Interesting. That's so interesting that you felt like, I mean, because because you didn't have a police background, because you weren't a detective. Is that what you sort of? How do you write something that you know nothing about, kind of thing? But look at you. You wrote an incredible book about something you knew nothing about, and you wrote it about real things. I think so clearly you're worthy.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I think it was, I thought, I don't have any experience. I don't have any training. And I think when you love something so much and you admire something so much, it's like going to a museum and you look at a beautiful Renoir or a Monet and you admire it, but you don't think to yourself, I could do that.
Oh, of course. Right.
No, so I think I looked at that. I looked at mysteries like that, like, oh, I love you and I admire you and I love everything about you, but little old me could never do that. I didn't think that I could be. I didn't think I could.
And here you are. One of my favorite things to do with books is to find sort of a little pivotal scene or something that really grabs my attention and speaks to me. And to this one, I have to say, I love so much. And it's about sort of this very wealthy woman, Frances, and her stepmom, Eva. And they're talking about something that her husband she feels wronged. And she says to her stepmother, Frances does, but how can I ever forgive him? And her stepmom says, oh, my darling girl, women are the moral compass of society. We exert our good influences on marriage, our children, the circles in which we move, and the communities in which we exist. Without us, the moral structure of society would disintegrate, and with that, society itself. So we forgive, even when our hearts are broken. We hold our heads up and march on when we feel as though we might die, because we're women and we're wives. It's the bravest and the best thing we can do, and our worlds and the world at large are far better for it. Which is still so true, right? This is still the reality of women.
This is still the reality of women, and the sacrifices that women make at their own expense to compensate for the mistakes that men have made that exert a cost on the lives of everyone around them, and the innocent bystanders who are watching a swath be cut through the middle of their life, watch their life, crack and fall apart. And yet they are the ones that have to make this okay for everyone else through their own personal sacrifice. And the injustice of that, and the unfairness of that, and the deep wrongness of that, and yet the fact that it keeps happening over and over and over, even now 100 years later, is something that I really wanted to explore.
Yeah, it's so true. And the rage that emits or evokes in all of us, right? That is just, gesundheit. That is absolutely right. Well, I did really just love that. And it's that is not a central part of the story, but she is such a true character and a true woman of that time in a really, unfortunate spot that happens still today. So
exactly. And I really wanted to explore the theme of justice and fairness in all of its many many fields that it plays out on. And that is in the criminal field, right? A murder. And that is in the field of marriage, where all of us, it's like, oh, I'm giving a little more than I'm getting. Or, oh, I'm having to make a sacrifice that I really technically shouldn't have to be making in order to make this relationship stay whole, or make this world that we have created of this family stay whole. And that is unfair. And so, or the sacrifices that people have to make at work, for Detective Coughlin, the sacrifices that he has to make in order to stay in his position as the head of the detectives unit in the NYPD. That's not fair. And so fairness and injustice and unfairness was something I wanted to explore in all of the many ways that it plays out. And Ella had to face a lot of things that were unfair. So what is fair? What is just? That's something I really wanted to look at.
No, it's exactly right. And that was I love that. Plus I do, since it's Killer Women, I always love to sort of highlight a unique women perspective. So all of that. So it's so beautifully done. So this book is out on August 1st.
Yes, ma'am.
August 1st. So you are listening to this podcast on August 3rd, which means it is out in the world right now, and you need to go and grab your copy. Before I let you go, Sarah, can you tell us what you're working on now?
So I am taking some time to replenish my creative energy.
Yes.
And to sort of get my legs under me, get my feet under me before I plunge into the next project. And I think, there's so much pressure to just constantly be producing and constantly.
Yeah.
I mean, the pressure on writers is to produce a book a year. And I just think that pace is inhumane almost. And I think that, humans are the only living thing that do not hibernate, that do not have a rest season. And we wonder why we're so exhausted all the time, and why we have nothing left in the tank. And so in this world of fast fashion, fast food, faster internet, fast, go.
Right.
As much as I feel that pressure bearing down on me, I am trying to step back from it and say, what? I actually am going to hibernate, and I'm going to rest, because every living thing needs to rest, and every living thing needs to hibernate. So I'm going to take that pause and hope that I come back replenished.
You will. And in the meantime, this is a long feat, right? I mean, there's a lot that goes into writing this kind of book, and you need to be ready. When you're going to do it again, it's going to be another, right? It's not just like a ski down the hill. It's a big climb. So
it's climbing Mount Kilimanjaro to get to the top, and then realize there's another Kilimanjaro, of then marketing it, first editing it, then another Kilimanjaro on top of that to then market it, and then another Kilimanjaro on top of that to write the next one. And it's like, but wait, when do I get to go back to base camp and take a nap?
Yes, I love that. Well, I'm going to meet you at base camp, because I think that sounds like a fabulous idea. So I'm so grateful for you joining us today. And this book is beautiful. Also, I love, because I always sneak a peek under the covers of things, I love that they covered it with that beautiful, very 20s Art Deco that also shows up behind her in the cover. So that is, and I think Thomas and Mercer does a beautiful job with their hardcover book. So it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. And I love it. It's such a great book. So congratulations, celebrate, lots of champagne. And I will look forward to seeing you and raising a glass to you in person.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me on, Danielle. Thank you for your reading it and understanding it and resonating it, for your excellent questions, and for, getting this information out that most people aren't talking about, out to bringing it to light about the path to publication and the real path to getting that book on the shelf. I really appreciate that. This is so wonderful.
Oh, I'm so happy to do it. It's totally my passion project. I love talking to other authors too, because it reminds us that we're all in this together, and it's brutal. If we didn't have each other, what would we do? So
Exactly.
So congratulations again, and really do celebrate it. It's always such an exciting thing to hold your own book in your hands. And for everybody listening, this has been Killer Women with Sarah DeVello and her debut mystery, Broadway Butterfly, which is so fun and an absolute must read. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.